April 27th. We're going to be getting through more of Outsiders here in just a moment. Let's see. Tomorrow is a normal day. You do have best tomorrow, just so that you're aware of that one. No. See? Other kid, not so much. Soon, we're going to have multiple kids in the hallway, and I'll just shut the door and put them at different tables. Because one of them is down to 6 points. Shh, he's still moving on. So at this point, let's see. Tomorrow, no SEL. We have no SEL the rest of the year. Friday, I'm telling you now, your e-learning is going to be the test over the entire book. Also, because I'm going to go through and talk about chapters 9 and 10 today, or at least probably mostly 9, how many questions you guys have, and then 11, 12 tomorrow. I know you guys talk to each other because you guys are going to talk about the fact like Bob is dead and Johnny dies and stuff like that, and the fact that Dally has died. And so stuff like that doesn't go on the quiz because those are the things you guys tell each other. As long as you've read book, you should be fine. But just so you are aware, the quiz is a one-take quiz, and you have a 40-minute time limit on it. So I just figured I'd give you a heads up on that one, so as you guys go into it, then you should be good to go from there. Today, I'll try to walk you guys through and see if you guys have questions and try to help you out as best I can. And tomorrow, we'll talk about end of book, and then I think that's it. Let's see. Oh, no! Computer again! So many issues! I give up. Alright. Sorry, we had computer issues from there. Let's see. Schedule for... Alright. Let's see. I'm going to run back through the chapters 9 and 10 to try and help you guys out from that one. You should have gotten to the part with John, with a big rumble, and then the issue with Johnny where he's no longer with us. And then we're going to talk about the part with Dally and how Dally's no longer with us and all the sadness from there. This popped up when you got to the part with Johnny dying and he talks to Ponyboy and is talking about staying gold. This is what he was referring back to, the whole idea of staying gold, which we'll talk about. And the fact that Dally was carrying the gun that does not have any bullets, which is what he uses after Johnny dies. That's why he gets himself in trouble with the police.
And gets shot.
And he does get a few bullets. And let's see, there's our big rumbly thing, which we'll talk about. Rumbly thing that we'll talk about. And then we've covered all spoilers. There's no real big spoilers left. Good conversation. Nathan?
What's the movie? What is it? You said there was a movie.
Correct.
What is it?
The Outsiders? It's called The Name of the Book.
Are we watching it?
I don't know what you guys do on your free time.
No, all of us as a class.
Oh, God, no. I don't care what you guys do at home. Right. Anyway, back to here. Let's see. For story, they're having the rumble because if Greasers win, what is it the Socias have to agree to?
No idea.
They have to leave the area and they can no longer hunt down Greasers for fun. If the Socias win, they get to keep beating up Greasers as much as they want to. Then we got to... This was the finally got to the big fight between the two of them, and the whole point of the rumble was to beat up the other group. But if you can have a big enough, strong enough person step up for your fight, then the fight never actually happens. Which is why the Greasers picked Thank you, Derry, who's their biggest, toughest guy, who steps up and like thumps his chest, like me, Derry, and trying to scare off any of the Socias. But the Socias do find somebody to step up and fight, which. Was it Paul?
Yeah, Paul.
Paul, who is Derry's friend from back in high school, and they used to be like on the same football team, and apparently Paul is not afraid of him. But then they do the classic beginning of the fight thing where they just stare at each other and keep going in circles, and neither one wants to throw the first punch until someone shows up late, which is... And that's when Dally comes running in, and he's like, you can't have a rumble without me. And he comes running in. Derry turns to look, and he's like, what's going? And then Paul's like, I'm a sucker, and then punches Derry in the back of the head, because apparently Socias are horrible people. And that's when he punches him in the back of the head, and the whole big fight happens. Normally, who does Ponyboy get to team up with?
Johnny.
Now, why is it Ponyboy and Johnny team up?
Because they get the bigger person. Oh no, because they're both weak.
They're both smaller people. Ponyboy's all of 14 and Johnny had just turned 16. So because they were smaller than the others, they sort of
Johnny's
teamed up
16?
to form like one normal big-sized person. Why does Johnny not join?
Because he's paralyzed.
Now, in my thinking, you could still bring Johnny because you could just pick him up by the legs and swing him around. Well, if your thought is, but Mr. Broviac, wouldn't that hurt Johnny? The answer is,
No.
right? He's paralyzed. He's not going to feel it, and his arms are just going to be like swinging out there, and you can have Derry just like, "Rah, rah," and Johnny's not going to complain. He'd probably be smiling the whole time anyway, like, "Wee," having a good time. And worst case, what are you going to do, like break his spine again? Yeah, he's fine. So, Ponyboy has to have a new fight buddy that goes along with him. And his new fight buddy is Dally. Now, why does Dally only count as half a person? One of his arms, I forget his left arm, is all bandaged and busted up, so he only has one good punching arm. So he's like, I've only got one arm, and Ponyboy's like, I'm only half a person. And they're like, yay! And they team up and they start fighting. And then at one point, Ponyboy gets knocked down, and one of the Socias is kicking him in the head. Nowadays, we know what that is when you get multiple contusions to the head. That was, so Ponyboy gets a concussion. They just don't know it's a concussion at the time. He gets up and he was like, everything feels all weird and wobbly. And that's because he has a concussion, which will play a role here in just a moment. Luckily, all of the greasers, well, you did that one. Luckily, there we go. Greasers managed to win. To connect the Greaser-Sochi fight to today, the Greasers are Ukraine and the Socias are Russia. Where the idea being is that Russia was this big bad person who's like, I like beating people up, and then goes over to Ukraine, and Ukraine's like, we're fighting for our life. Same thing with the Greasers and Socias. The Greasers like, we're fighting for our life, and the Socias like, we like beating people up. Which usually, like trying to live is more important than enjoying hitting people. So at the end, the Greasers fight harder, and they end up winning this whole big battle, and the Socias end up running away, which we're hoping happens with Ukraine and Russia at some point. But unless the Socias go, we have a nuclear bomb, and then it's not going to work out as well. Then, after big fighty fight thing, Ponyboy does go to the hospital, but it's not for his concussion.
Johnny.
He goes to the hospital for Johnny. Because that's when Dally, as soon as the fight ends, Dally picks him up and is like, you gotta come! And they take off running to, not running, driving to the hospital.
So Dally just pulls out the knife.
Yeah, Dally really likes stabbing people. It's a lot of fun. It's hard to go wrong with that. And also they get pulled over by the police, and Dally's like, hey, pretend you're hurt. And it was like, dude, I just got kicked in the head like 5 times. I don't have to pretend. Dally's like, good, channel that. And then they get to the hospital, and then Dally pulls out a knife and threatens to stab the doctor. And the doctor's like, you don't have to stab people. You can just go in. He's like, you sure? And he's like, no. And then he goes in to see poor Johnny. And Johnny
Dies.
Before Johnny dies, he does tell Ponyboy to stay gold, which goes back to that reference with the poem. Because what is he trying to tell Ponyboy to do?
Stay happy.
Stay happy. Who is he afraid that Ponyboy is going to come out like?
Dally.
Like Dally. He's like, you gotta understand, Dally is grumpy and hates everything. He's like, you can't be grumpy and hate everything. You have to find the happy things. He's like, right now, you have happiness in you. Hold on to that happiness. Stay gold, stay happy. And then Johnny, dies. And then we got to this moment where you have the leave me so I can cry over the deaths of fictional characters. For those of you who have emotions, you may have felt emotions at this point. Those of you who got rid of your emotions, probably not so much. If you had an emotionectomy and had yours removed like me, I completely understand. So, that's the next book, yeah. And then, with Johnny, being burned is usually not enough to kill you. Having a broken back is not enough to kill you. So, Johnny's injuries, in theory, shouldn't kill him. And yet, Johnny dies. To explain why he dies, if you guys ever seen in TV shows or movies when there's a person in the hospital and the doctor comes out and they're like, hey, if he has a fighting chance, he can pull through, but it's going to be hit or miss here for a while. But if he's a fighter, he's going to make it. And then we come back later and the person's like, he made it through. He's a fighter. Sometimes that's legit. And you can pull through some injuries if you want to. Johnny doesn't want to live. Not really suicide as much as why am I going to heal? His best case scenario, if Johnny gets better, he's crippled for life, in a wheelchair, stuck in a home with parents who beat him all the time. He's like, that's what I'm healing for, to get to that. And he doesn't really want to, so he kind of just gives up and doesn't fight to get better and just sort of fades away, especially after the parents of the kids he saved comes by and he's like, I actually did a thing. He's like, I'm a good person right now. Why would I bother going back to my family who hates me? And he just sort of dies. Brett?
Well, when he asked to go with dairy, soda, and
Because legally you can't. If your parents still want you to come there, you can't just leave. Nowadays we have things like an emancipation where you can try to leave your parents. But again, I'm not sure they could bring him in either because they can realize they hardly have enough money to support themselves, let alone Johnny, who may not be very mobile and having issues. So Johnny kind of just gives into it. How did Pony get to the hospital?
Dairy or Dally?
Yeah, Dally drove him. But as soon as Johnny dies, Dally flips out. That's when he starts punching the wall and he's like, no, I can't do it. And then he dips and runs away, and we find out what happened to him in a little bit, which leaves Ponyboy stuck at the hospital with no way to get home, and he just watched his best friend die. And he has a concussion, which makes your brain not work real well. So here's the part where he walks home from there. And the story could take a turn because as he's walking home, random guy pulls up next to him and goes, hey, little boy, would you like a ride home in my car? And Ponyboy goes, yes, I would, and gets in the car. And I was like, oh, this story's going to take a turn. You did that one. So we get to, oh, sorry, I have this part. So I figured just to make it more emotionally strong for you, this is Johnny disappearing. There we go. So I was trying to do my best to represent Ponyboy getting his ride home. I'm not sure if it was a white van. I believe it was a car, but in my head, I imagined it being a white van. And
with the creepy guy.
With the creepy guy. And the guy ended up not being creepy. He actually ended up being really nice, and he let Ponyboy like ride in his car. And at one point he was like, hey kid, you're bleeding all over my car. He was like, what? Spurt, spurt, spurt. He was like, there's blood everywhere. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry. You know how it is bleeding at times. And he gives him a ride back to his house and then lets him out. At that point, Ponyboy then walks into his house and sees the people who were in the Rumble dairy, not Dally, because Dally took off running. His brother Soda Pop, and then Steve, and Two Bit. So the four of them are still sitting in the house when Ponyboy walks in. He's like, hey, you guys remember Johnny? They're like, what do you mean remember? And he was like, yeah, he's dead. And they're like, no! And they start flipping over tables and freaking out and having all kinds of issues. And then things get a little bit worse from there. Because all of a sudden, Dally calls. And Dally says, hey, I didn't take this whole death thing real well. So Dally, after Johnny dies, what does Dally decide to do?
Rob the gas station.
As everyone does when you're sad, he robs a gas station. Been there before myself. And so he goes and robs a gas station. And what weapon does he use? He uses his heater, and what do we know about it?
No bullets.
Unloaded. It plays a big role in just a moment. But of course, the people at the store didn't know that. So he robs. You said it was a grocery store, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a grocery store.
Grocery store.
It's not.
In my head, I keep thinking gas station. I think it was a grocery store he robbed.
Grocery store.
Grocery store he robs, and then he calls his friend. And he's like, "Hey, I just robbed a grocery store.
Bro.
You guys need to come help me out." And they're like, "Bro, we got your back." And they come running out there and wants to meet at the near their house. Empty lot. He's like, "Come meet me at the empty lot." Oh yeah. What time of day is it?
Like 12.
It's night.
It's nighttime. And he goes, "Come meet me in the empty lot." And of course, his friend's like, "Yeah, we're going to meet you in the empty lot." So they come running out to him to meet him in the empty lot. Of everywhere in the entire empty lot he could go, he stops
In the light.
directly underneath the street light for a very specific reason, which
So he can see.
we're going to get to tomorrow because I only have a minute or left and it's going to take longer to get through it.
So he could.
Tomorrow we're going to talk about what happens to Dally, and then we're going to talk about the last part with Ponyboy and stuff like that. If you've not read, I mean, it's a good book. I'm not going to force you to read it. You get to make choices. If you have my book, After the Bell Rings, like always, because my goal is to teach you responsibility.